We have absolutely constructed failure into leadership by continuing to measure people's success around what they do. Hey, g'day there, fellow humans. It's Mark LeBusque here again for another episode of the In the Raw podcast. Couple of interesting questions today. One very much related to the time we're in around these new laws around the right to disconnect that have come into place in Australia just this week. And then the second question is about negative traits or behaviours that someone can carry into leadership that's going to derail them pretty quickly. But before we get there, again, just thanks to a few people reaching out on the format of the new podcast on how much they're getting out of it and how real they're finding it, which is part of the objective of it, is keep it real, keep it raw, keep it unfiltered, and no sugarcoating or hundreds and thousands if there's a you-know-what sort of sandwich there as well. So keep those questions coming. Luke has sent me in a question. Thank you, Luke, which is, what is the one behaviour or trait that you have seen derail more leadership careers? So the great challenge here, Luke, is just to go for one, because there are many. There are many little things that happen. I don't know what goes on when people get into what they call a leadership role, and all of a sudden things change for them. But if I had to pick one, and I think we're a victim of our environment and a victim of our circumstance with this that sets us down this path, is our inability to let go. So let me say that again. The greatest derailer, I think, the greatest trait or behaviour that is stuffing up people stepping into leadership is being able to step back now and let go and let the people who do the work best get the work done. Because as human beings, Luke, we get rewarded for the things that we do and not necessarily how we choose to be. I talk about this a lot in my programs, the concept of humanivation. Thinking about how you're going to choose to be before you do whatever you're going to do. But the system that we've been rewarded by forever is on what we do, on how technically good we are and how that can show out, because they're the tangible things, mate. They're the things people can see. They're the things people can capture on a KPI sheet. And because of all of that, we keep doing it. Now, that's just human nature. I'm not anti-human, you know that, but we have absolutely constructed failure into leadership by continuing to measure people's success around what they do. So some examples of that, I've talked about this before. If I think of my own example, in my career in logistics, I started out on the afternoon shift with good old mate Lenny Singleton and his team, and it was wonderful playing darts and doing a whole lot of things in between loading planes and packing freight and doing those things. But because I could pack the freight in the right place and put the parcels in the right bag, and I could do all the technical stuff well, minimal mistakes, then they put me in the call centre. And as I've said before, I could find the missing wedding dress or the missing mining part or floppy disk or whatever it was that needed to be found. And so they put me into a supervisor's role. And I've had a few team members there, and my role was to still find the missing parcels, as well as help others do the same thing. And then I get elevated into sales and then ultimately into management roles. And because I get rewarded for being technically good, Luke, I keep doing those things. And all of a sudden, my people working for me think I'm a bit of an ass because I'm doing their work. And usually because I want to stand out, I'm maybe at times taking on the kudos for the work they're doing. So there's a real challenge here that it's not necessarily that the human is bad. It's that we have a system that rewards technical competence. So it's very, very difficult to let go of this behaviour. So we're going to keep doing it. I guess a couple of things to think about if you are moving from, let's say, a role where it's been more about your technical proficiency, Luke, and now it's going to be less about that, and it's going to be more about how you can enable and support and advocate for others to do the work, give them space to experiment, give them space at times to fail, and I guess have their backs in that situation as well, give a bit of air cover to them for failures they might make. This is a big mindset shift away from being the doer, the smartest person in the room, the technical expert. All of the things that have got you to where you are today aren't going to get you to the next step. So you need to start to give permission to those people. The first person you got to give permission to is yourself to step back. And that's going to be scary because you may not be getting the pats on the back that you always got. You may not finish in the top 3 in the sales numbers, whatever it might be. But your role now isn't to be the technical expert, the smartest person in the room. Your role is now very, very different. And I think this is the greatest behaviour trait that sees people not make it in a leadership position. And we often hear, Mark didn't quite make it. He couldn't quite make the jump. But guess what? We keep on rewarding Mark for not making the jump. So he'll continue to behave in the way that he does, or it'll be you, Luke, doing the same thing because that's what you get rewarded for. So as they say in adaptive leadership, you've got to find the balance between being on the dance floor, doing the work, doing the technical day-to-day stuff, making sure you're seen there too, because I think credibility is a really important piece here, getting around and understanding what are the dances, if the dance moves change on the dance floor. So you need to be down there, but you need to start to learn some new dance moves as well. And one of the ways you can do that is get up on the balcony and look down and look for some patterns on what's changing. How's your mindset shift going to move away from doing to being? And how's that impacting on not just in the short term, because you won't usually see it short term here, Luke, but in the longer term, how's that impacting on things like your attrition or lack of it, because you're giving your people a place and a chance to step in to do the work like you were given at some point in time? How does it also help you to start to feel comfortable in not doing the work and turning up to your meetings with your peers and talking more about what your people are doing rather than what you're doing? I used to always get told I should have been out on the road more with my sales team, doing the sales stuff. And my response was, no, my job is to enable them to go out and do that, not to sell it. By the way, I was shit at selling anyway. So that's not why I was there. If you stay in the doing mode, Luke, and you're in a leadership role now, mate, start counting down the days before you get that little speech that, maybe it's not quite for you, because it'll come. Because the more that you find it hard to let go, the more that you get caught up in FOMO, the greater the challenge is going to be for you to step out of being a technical expert and the doing and step into being a true demonstrator of leadership in the being space. It's a big step, and it's not a step that is made easily, and it's not a step to be taken lightly. But I think if you want to stay in leadership for a extended period of time, then you need to find a way to move away from the doing to the being. This second one, this may not be the popular answer to this question because there's been so much talked about this particular topic, and it came into effect in Australia just 26th of August. It's the new law which has come in through the Fair Work Act by the Ombudsman, which is about the right to disconnect. Employees have the right to refuse to monitor, read or respond to contact outside of their working hours unless the refusal is seen as unreasonable. So Emma has sent me this question, and it's simply this. What's your take, Mark, on the new laws around the right to disconnect? There's a few things here for me. The first thing is it's a bloody sad state of affairs, Emma, that we need to put in a law about a human being's right to disconnect from work. Now, why is it a sad state of affairs? Because perhaps we've got ourselves to this situation because there's the few and not the many that have been taking advantage of their position of power in the hierarchy to put unnecessary pressure on human beings outside of their working hours. Now, we could also argue the point that the more senior you are, the more you need to be caught up in being available in your workplace. And I know there may be some roles where that's the case, but before we got our titles, before we moved up the hierarchy, we were humans with other needs as well. Time for self, time for family and friends, time in our community, time for some sleep, a whole lot of other bits and pieces that I think people have missed out on, and hence we see, the disengagement sitting at about 87% of people globally disengaged. So I think there's something in it that says that I think there's a minority of, let's call them arsehole type managers and organisations that have been putting this unwarranted and unnecessary pressure on others to be available without thinking about the consequences that may have around things like their mental health and other bits and pieces like that. But I do wonder if we are actually creating a solution that's looking for a problem here as well. So is the problem really that big? I'm sure if someone is caught up in this in a big way, they'd be saying right now, yes, it is. But I also think it comes down to choice, Emma. And is it a choice for you or others that if you do receive that email and it is unreasonable, whatever that means, this is going to be an absolute bloody goldmine for our legal friends, by the way, at determining what unreasonable or reasonable is. You can hear the cha-ching of their bloody cash registers going, let's get stuck into this. In fact, what's really interesting since it came out yesterday, Emma, is how much I'm seeing on LinkedIn of people who are now offering advice on how to deal with, these new right to disconnect laws. So I guess it's going to create a whole lot of new experts, just as did COVID and, working from home experts now, and how do you connect experts and running virtual things. All of a sudden there'll be a move to being experts in this space. So if it's a solution looking for a problem, perhaps it's just a knee-jerk reaction. Maybe it's also a populist vote-grabbing play as well. Who knows? But I got a bit of a sense that it's going to create a whole lot of unintended consequences. And I just want to share a couple of them as in my take for this. So those who will benefit usually won't be the organisation or perhaps the employee, but I think our legal friends are going to go into an absolute frenzy over this. So that's going to be one of the unintended consequences. And then what comes from that, I think, is going to be a loss of trust and connection. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean here is that, there's something in this around the relationships that have been formed with the employee and the employer. And if we want to work to the letter of the law here, what then starts to happen to, if we look at the elements of trust around things like reliability, around things like having someone's back, what happens now if someone takes this to the letter of the law? What starts to happen with the trust that's been built between human beings, I think will start to become eroded, because there's going to be in the back of people's mind, should I make that call? Should I send that email through? And look, if it's not that important, don't send it through, leave it to the next day. But I think there's going to be some real blurred lines here now. And when we get blurred lines, we start to look for answers. If we can't make sense, we go into our bad news filing cabinet in our head, Emma, and then it starts to create stories that I think will start to disconnect human beings, not just in outside working hours, but in inside the working hours as well. The other thing I think it's going to create is a whole lot of stress. And I say for most humans concerned about the downside of this, and that's around their relevance and their contribution. At one end of the scale, you got people doing work, and not because the organisation tells them to when they're on holidays, because they're worried that they're not there and everything goes right. I'll say that again. They're worried that they're not there and everything goes right. So what about if they're now not contactable? What about if they don't know what's going on overnight and they sort of get in and they're a bit surprised the next morning? So it starts to get people more worried about, am I still relevant? Is my contribution going to be diminished now that I'm not going to be contactable? And then what is unreasonable and what is reasonable as well? So I wonder if whoever came up with this clever idea about bringing this legislation in had thought about the fact that, or maybe this for a moment, maybe that person who came up with the legislation, this happens quite a bit with our friends in government, they've never had a real job. but they're pretty happy at creating legislation for people who have had a real job and then sort of throwing it out there and going, well, you sort it all out. You'll work it out. We'll get our legal friends in who can actually sort it out for you. So maybe, just maybe, one of the unintended consequences here, and my biggest take on this is perhaps we shouldn't be creating legislation or new laws if we've never worked in a real job. So there you go, folks. That's my take on both the idea of the one behaviour trait that we need to do something about if we want to progress in leadership, and then my take on the right to disconnect laws. Now, they may not be popular. I don't really care about that because it's my take. Happy to hear your feedback on it. Please shoot me a line, DM me on any of my socials. Come through. LinkedIn's the best one. And remember also to send me some of your dicey, spicy, controversial leadership questions, and I'll give them my very best without filtering, without putting the hundreds and thousands on the shit sandwich, to do my best to answer them. But until next time, let's keep it real, let's keep it raw, and let's do this work in the raw. Bye for now.